Indeed, DWP have already announced such flexibility for lone parents. The benefits cap, I suppose, has been one of the more interesting aspects of the whole debate on welfare, with many people coming down on one side of the argument or other. To me, at first glance, the proposal to limit the level of entitlement to welfare benefits to £500 a week for a couple and £350 a week for a single household does make sense. I suppose if we are to be serious when we say work should always pay, then the only way to truly ensure this is by the introduction of a cap. Interestingly, the benefit cap is an issue which strict parity will benefit Northern Ireland, as the cap will effectively be set to correspond with the level of earnings in Great Britain. Just for clarification, could the Minister detail exactly how many households will be affected in Northern Ireland? I have sought this information previously for him, but have not as yet received a definitive answer. I don't need to reiterate all these points that I and other members have made on the changes to housing benefit, many of which have already been enforced in Northern Ireland. We all know the issues: an increasing housing benefit budget being slashed by unsympathetic means. Given our lack of appropriate housing, I have previously sought guarantees from the Minister on safeguards for changes arising from the changes to the shared room rate. I would again ask him today, can he tell me what he has done? Can he tell me that Northern Ireland's housing stock will be able to adapt to these changes to housing benefit, both now and in what is yet to come? On the wider issue, many of the requirements laid out in the bill, this legislation, if made law, it will place significant requirements of which it expects the claimants to meet in order to receive benefits. Not wanting to stray from this debate too widely, but I could remind the Minister that the number of people claiming unemployment-related benefits stood at 63,100 in August, and this, sadly, is only heading in one direction if recent events are anything to go by. I am sure that even the Minister looked on appreciatively up until recently, when he noted Northern Ireland's employment level below the UK average. Well, I'm sorry, but with 8.2% we are now on the wrong side of average, and we are significantly off message in regards to our economic inactivity rate of 26.9%, the highest among the 12 UK regions. We must also remember that young people growing up in workless households are much more likely to struggle to find stable employment themselves. The point I am making, Mr. Speaker, is that whilst I skim through Part 2 of the bill, I see all the new glossy clauses on conditionality and sanction. I have seen and heard little over recent months as to how the Department expects people to move from benefits to jobs when there are already so few jobs available. I am in no doubt that welfare reform must work in tandem with a revitalised economy, improving our education system and increasing our early intervention. There is a clear link between long-term unemployment, cycles of deprivation and health, and Northern Ireland must begin to tackle the plight of those people becoming trapped in a web of dependency. But today's proposals do nothing to answer these questions. Moving on, whilst it's not fair just to blame the Department of Social Development, after all, they appear to have taken their usual unwavering direction from DWP. I do find it sadly characteristic that even amongst the biggest shake-up of welfare in generations, they have found the time to devote enough energy to review their counter-fraud and error capability. Officials and the Minister are keen to detail that under this bill, claimants who either fail to report or are negligent with their claims will face strict financial penalties. I would like to draw the Minister's attention that although his department administers around £5 billion each year in benefits, they only incurred losses of £54 million in 2011 to error and fraud. Any right-thinking people will say that £54 million is still too much, and I agree, but it must be taken in context. It accounted for 1.1% of total expenditure and compares very favourably with estimates of over 2% for the Department of Work and Pensions. Of course, like any good department in Northern Ireland, DSD distance themselves for blame from supposed failings. But I'd like to make the point that of the 1% loss, 0.4% is fraud, 0.3% is customer error, and the other 0.3% remains official and departmental error. Another major element of today's bill is the introduction of the Personal Independence Plan, which will, beginning from June 2013, replace Disability Living Allowance. Of course, it's emblematic of the way in which this process has been conducted, that even now we have very little idea of what the detailed design of PIP will look like. Whilst I would hope there would be a simplification of the process, I would hope even more that the Department is aware of what they are letting themselves in for by taking this on at the same time as the introduction of universal credit. The Department claims, quite rightly in my opinion, DLA is in dire need of review. It hasn't been looked at since its introduction 20 years ago. Again, it is a benefit about which there is quite a degree of genuine public concern. The Department is administering £750 million of Treasury money on this benefit alone every year, a sum bigger than many of our executive budgets put together. The need for the Disability Living Allowance and Personal Independence Plan, when they are introduced, is comprehensive, but we need to ensure that it is targeted towards those who need it and those who deserve it. With over 10% of our population, 180,000 people currently in receipt of it, I hope the Department are fully prepared for the body of work which they and their staff on the ground are about to embark on. I wait patiently for the regulation coming forward that details the final rules on what constitute daily activities and mobility activities when assessing entitlement to PIP. I cannot emphasise enough to the Minister the sheer importance of getting this particular aspect of welfare reform right. People, whether they be on the mobility component or the daily living component, will be subsequently judged, and for many other schemes using this determination. For example, I would raise the particular issue of members of victims groups in Northern Ireland and their eligibility for funding through channels such as the Northern Ireland Memorial Fund. I would plead with the Minister to give a commitment that such individuals will not be disadvantaged through these reforms. Of course, it would be remiss of me not to use this opportunity to raise my concerns about the overall assessment process of this new payment. I would urge the Minister to look at the work capability assessment and everything that has gone wrong there, and learn, sir, please, from those mistakes. There is a justifiable concern that a private company involved in that travesty will now be in a prime position to secure the bid for assessing Personal Independence Plan applicants. If that happens, then all I will say that the Minister needs to think long and hard about the related measures and performance-related measures which he builds into that particular contract. No. Mr. Mosky didn't. I don't think I will either. Just finally on PIP, if I could make one request from the Minister, and that is to be understanding of Northern Ireland's individual need. Given the fact that this small province that we all jointly call home is but a small dot on the map globally and has emerged out of 40 years of murder and mayhem, something which continues to contribute to the fact that the current main disabling condition for Disability Living Allowance recipients here is mental health. That's over 40,000 people, many of which already believe this world can be a scary enough place, and now to run the gauntlet of being forced through the new assessments. If people on Disability Living Allowance are not successful in their applications for PIP, it will have a far greater impact than just the immediate financial loss, for it will affect their entitlements to other forms of support, and if they turn and decide to appeal, they'll face even further costs in the tribunals. Some, I have no doubt, can and should be able to be removed off this benefit, but those about which I am most concerned are the silent majority who will remain too afraid to speak up, have no one to speak for them, and claim what they're entitled to. I would urge the Minister to ensure that there does remain an appropriate level of support and information for people during this entire process. Given that there will be huge numbers of people involved in the adoption of universal credit, not to mention the transfer to PIP, it is vital that appropriate provisions are put in place to ensure that the process runs as smoothly as possible. We all know, as elected representatives in our own constituencies, the value of independent advice services, and without them, I doubt that anyone in this House believes the current social security system will be able to cope. Currently, never mind after the reforms are brought in. I know through my time in Castlereagh and East Belfast, I've worked closely with organisations such as Advice NI. I cannot stress enough the role which these organisations will play, and therefore I would make a specific request of the Minister and ask him, would he support the inclusion of a new clause in the bill which gives people a statutory right to independent advice and support? Another huge issue facing all of us here today, especially if the amendment is successful, is the future of the social fund in Northern Ireland. Unless today's legislation proceeds through all the necessary channels correctly, there is a risk, and I don't think it's a bluff and I don't think it's a threat, there is a risk that all the crucial support that this offers may disappear. It is highly regrettable that we now find ourselves in the situation of needing to make haste or rush. We must bear in mind the hundreds of thousands of people who benefit from this fund each year. Surely, Minister, there are safeguards which you could put in place so that this situation cannot come to fruition if we did find ourselves out of sync with the current timetable. Given that welfare reform has now come to the fore, it is important that the Executive as a collective body come to agreement on the future of passported benefits in Northern Ireland. The problem, from what I can see, is the same as it is with every other issue, that every department administers their own individual benefits, and until they can put that silo mentality to the side, the argument is over, even before it has begun. It will be necessary for departments here to develop new solutions, to enable them to have new criteria in place for the introduction of universal credit. I am glad that there does appear to have been at least some planning for this, given that departments across the water are in discussions with officials here. Of course, much like everything else in this bill, these efforts look to me a little too little and a little too late. Unsurprisingly, then, that I am told that the Department of Work and Pensions are currently, and allegedly desperately, trying to pull together an interim IT system to buy but a little time. The Minister may not have wanted it raised here today, but I am sure that he is yet to receive one willing participant. But the issue of introducing income thresholds for eligibility for these passported benefits is one that must be confronted and addressed. I am led to believe that the executive subgroup on welfare reform, in which my colleague Danny Kennedy has been faithfully attending for months on end, was recently debating this issue. Just on that point, and given the situation we see here today, the bill being introduced so late it's right on the wire, and the subsequent, to some, grandstanding Sinn Féin amendment, what does the Minister of Social Development actually believe that this subgroup achieved?